Welcome to Britannica podcast. I can't even say our name right. This is me crashing and burning.
You can see why I didn't want to go first.
Welcome to the Nakama Britannica podcast. Today we'll be discussing Fusé, Memoirs of a Huntress. It is a fantasy folklore story directed by Masayuki Miyagi and animated by TMS Entertainment. I am ordinarily known as Vivi's Queen in the forum.
I am also known as Professor Irony.
Hi, I'm Arbalist on the forum.
So, Fusé, borrowing elements from the Hakkenden, an oft-adapted staple of Japanese literature from the 19th century, Fusé is the story of Hamaji, a young hunter living in her family home in the mountains, but left alone since her grandfather's death, she decides to head for the capital city of Edo to join her wayward brother Dosetsu. Seeking quick entry into Edo's samurai elite, he convinces her that fame and fortune await them if they can flush out and kill a pair of Fusé, werewolf-like monsters who are apparently preying upon the citizens. Unfortunately, his plan goes badly awry when Hamaji quickly becomes close to Shino, a charismatic actor with a grudge against the shogun. Would anyone like to go first?
I'll take a stab at it then.
If you don't mind, I think it would be interesting if you wanted to start with you, so for the first time fairly recently, so it would be interesting to get your take on it.
Okay, I was sort of attracted to Fusé because we originally discussed two options, and I was attracted to Fusé because of the samurai action element. I thought it was going to be sort of
ninja stroke,
kind of fantasy ninja action orientated with a bit of werewolves, I guess. What we get, I think, is something disjointed, confused, and ultimately mediocre. It's not really terrible. I don't think it's absolutely the worst thing I've ever seen. It just feels really stale. Like it has borrowed lots of elements from other anime and then congealed it all and then come up with something that you weren't quite expecting, but like not in a good way. So I'm sort of left underwhelmed and confused, and mostly already forgetting what I've just seen. I don't know. It's a bit like if you were watching Final Fantasy, like Advent Children, but without knowing anything about the Final Fantasy franchise. So you come to it and you're just like, what? This doesn't make sense. It's a bit disjointed, and what are they talking about? I don't understand how this connects to that and why the characters feel the way they do. That's how I would describe my experience.
Okay, no, that's fine. I think I can get where you're coming from there.
I'll let you go first, because I'm just trying to find my original take on it as well, just so I know what I said then, so I can make sure I'm not seeming to have misplaced it. Oh, hold on, I think I found it. There's Garden of Words.
I still think Garden of Words sounds like a derisory term for that film. It's like it should be like, I don't know, Garden of Souls or something, and then somebody comes along and says, oh yeah, more like Garden of Words, am I right?
I wanted to add also, actually, with Fusé, it's supposed to be a movie, but the quality of animation makes it feel more like a TV series, and it just makes me worry about, I don't know, the anime movie seems to just declined in quality, at least where Fusé is concerned. I mean, it was what, 2012?
Yeah.
It looks more like a TV show from 2002. So I don't know, that was maybe part of it. I was just confused by that. That was not very insightful.
It's all right. But, if people expected insight, they would be listening to another podcast.
I still, for the most part, enjoyed it. I think on an entertainment basis, I enjoyed it. And for the folklore, I enjoyed it, because I do enjoy feudal Japan stuff. But
I mean, I saw it as just being kind of a fairly standard fantasy samurai adventure, enlivened by some tricksy commentary on the Hakkenden legend and some playful injection of kabuki theatre. But ultimately, I thought it was kind of undone by its own ambitions, as the narrative was incredibly dense later on in the film, and there were points towards the end where I just felt it was virtually impenetrable, and really I would grant a shiny penny to anyone who can accurately describe to me what is happening in the third act. I mean, from what you were saying about the animation, I I think the actual animation itself is fine. It's maybe not the greatest thing that I've ever seen in that terms, but I think. Are you sure you don't feel that it's more just the way the film is designed that makes you feel like it's been a TV production? Because the character designs are a bit sort of retro looking and a little bit kind of loose and slightly naive. I mean, I think the way they're animated is actually quite smooth looking at it, but I'm not sure exactly why they went with that. It's almost kind of like they've tried to make it purposely unattractive in a way. It's like no one in the film is the kind of what you would expect, the kind of classically good-looking hero or heroine or anything like that. Everyone is a bit kind of homely, and the designs are a bit, you said, like Lupin at one stage?
Yeah, it's a very weird mix, the animation. On the one hand, they are very slapsticky. So their eyes, for example, will swirl inside their heads, like you're watching a Lupin cartoon. On the other hand, the character designs reminded me a lot of, Studio Ghibli on one hand, but on the other hand, also Kimono no Soja Eren. Do you remember that one?
I never saw that. I heard the name, but I've not actually seen it.
It's an excellent TV series, but actually, I would say Eren looks more appropriate. It's very, very naive and quaint and cute and very, very childish looking character designs. The plot is just wonderful, but the character designs are very, very sort of as if you were pitching it at 10-year-olds. And that's the look that Fusé goes for. On the other hand, while they have these really sort of basic looking retro character designs, it's very, very gory. So in the first 5 to 10 minutes you will see chopped heads with lots of blood everywhere, and the blood is very thick and red, and you will see holes in chests and things like that. And some anime have tried this before, where they have this contrast of the horror that's happening to the characters, contrasted with the cute design of the characters themselves. I'm trying to think. Now and Then, Here and There is one example, but it's effective in Now and Then, Here and There, because it's not so much just about the gore, but the animation also isn't really. I don't know. It's more subtle and nuanced than that, and the characters aren't actually that cutesy. But with Fusé, it's such an extreme contrast. It almost seems to be disingenuous and forced. I just couldn't quite believe in it. I don't know. And the colors are all very pastel-y rather than being dark or anything to complement the mood, and it just felt like it was trying to do a Princess Mononoke, but really couldn't.
I was actually going to say that it's quite funny. I'm having a look at the details, because I was trying. You were mentioning about the art, and I did. For some reason, I was reminded of Eureka 7 slightly with the style. Yeah. But I didn't see that. Instead, I found out that apparently the art director also is the art director for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So put that one into mind.
Oh, I would have liked to have seen that.
He does both the normal one and Stardust. So he also did Big O.
That would have given me a feeling so complicated.
The film would have worked much, much better if it had JoJo's character design. Just want to put that out there.
If they did it as in the entire style of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, I think it would work a lot better.
I mean, they're kind of halfway there, I guess. They've already got the colours, but...
Yeah, that's true. So long as they do inverted palettes at some point, it'll be even better.
What did you think generally? Do you remember when you first saw it? What were you thinking about it?
I actually quite enjoyed it when I first watched it, but I think that was more from just a general entertainment basis, and obviously I do know some of the background with the story. Like I knew pieces of the Hakkenden, I knew of Yasufusa, so I think in some ways that may have given me a bit more enjoyment, because I knew roughly what the characters were, albeit they may have taken a different route on the way they were approaching the story. For the most part, I enjoyed it. I feel like I did understand the end of the film. God knows if I can explain it to you, but I can try. But I think I did feel like I understood it, and for the most part I did enjoy it, but I wouldn't say it was fantastic though. It was certainly an enjoyable film. It just was lacking that kind of spark for the most part. It was interesting from a historical sense because of the setting and all that, and just the kind of styling it had for the city. But yeah, it was good. It wasn't fantastic, I think.
Yeah, no, I would go along with that. I mean, it's I think what what appeals to me about the film is that it is trying to do. I don't think it's necessarily always achieving what it sets out to do, but I think it is genuinely at least trying to bring something a bit different to the table with this.
What do you think is different that it's bringing to the table? I don't recognise what you're talking about when you say like it's brought something new or different to the table. It's just a bog standard, humans versus another species, and they have to, there's intolerance.
There is a lot of that, yeah, but I think it's not hugely strong, but I think it is there. There is an intent to do something a bit different with it, and I don't think that they've necessarily achieved that as much as they could or should have done, but I think I look upon it more favourably for the fact that I did see something more in it. If I didn't think there was something to it, then I wouldn't be inclined to defend it as much as I am, basically.
Okay. I mean, if it was the only thing that I could potentially see in it was this talk of counterfeits, where, I got a sense that maybe it was trying to say something about being your true self, maybe. I don't know, maybe it also linked to the whole, to the fact that Hamaji, the main character, this girl who's the hunter, she's mistaken as a boy a lot, but, then her femininity shines through at certain points or whatever, and I just thought, oh god. But it was put in a very clumsy manner, and at least in my view, and
I didn't
a
really
bit too obvious.
Yeah, I mean, certainly a fair bit of Hamaji's character arc, particularly into the last part of the film, I thought was a bit fumbled. They could have done a lot more with it. One thing that I've seen a few people say about the film is that they feel it might have worked better as a short series rather than a one-off feature, as that would have given them more time to build up the characters, and I can kind of see that. But
12 episodes, that would have done it wonders.
Yeah, even like a short form OAV or something might have given it more of a shot, because I think that in a way is what I feel is the film's undoing. They're to me at least, there's a feeling that they're trying to pack too many things into the suitcase here, and for me it's the structure that is the big problem that lets it down. I feel like for the first half, first 2/3 even, it is kind of a standard adventure narrative, and then as it goes along it keeps adding in little bits and pieces that are kind of potentially more interesting. But then, to me, towards the end, that just gets too much for it. It can't keep control. It can't keep everything in play at the same time. It just collapses in on itself. So
that's a perfect description, I think.
Do we want to say anything else before we go into whys and wherefores and things we don't want repeated in the court of law?
I think I'm okay for the most part.
Okay.
I think most of the stuff I'm going to cover might touch on the spoiler stuff anyways, so...
Okay, well, basically, and I'm kind of going out on a limb with this, as to a great degree, I probably don't know what it is I'm talking about, but I feel like I have absorbed enough bits and pieces over just generally having watched anime and played certain computer games for a while that I kind of recognise like elements of Japanese theatre, kabuki theatre, when I see it, and I feel like that is what the film is doing differently. There is a sense of the theatrical that it's bringing to things. I mean, like when you're saying with the way they're bringing in the gore against the kind of silly comedy elements, to me that was something a little bit like, I guess the Western equivalent would be kind of Grand Guignol, the cheap seats, penny dreadful theatre, where you're getting stuff that is like a body comedy with gallons of blood flying everywhere. And I think there is perhaps something of that that's come up through the traditions of Japanese period drama. I mean, if you think about the historical samurai dramas that we see bits of in the West, they generally have blood flying everywhere. Never having tried it in reality, I don't know how true it would be, but when somebody gets hit with a sword in a Japanese film, generally you're going to see like a huge arc of blood spraying everywhere, and I think it's a bit of that that's come into this. And I'm not saying that is necessarily part of wholesome Japanese family entertainment, but I think that there is more of a tolerance for that kind of thing at like a lower age level in Japanese society than we would necessarily have in the West, and so I think it looks weird to us when we see it. You were mentioning Princess Mononoke a lot, and that is, for a Ghibli film, that is a very graphic film. I mean, there are limbs flying everywhere, and that is not often you can say that about a Miyazaki film. I mean, I know that perhaps this is hurting my argument when I'm trying to say that the film isn't necessarily trying to do the same things as Princess Mononoke, but I think rather it is coming from the same place as that. When you get the opening of the film, Hamaji, when she shoots the wolf, it's quite a graphic scene, but I feel like the film isn't dressing it up. I mean, when you have the graphic scenes of the blood with the animals in Princess Mononoke, it's about, oh bloody hell.
Thank God we don't have an important guest on the podcast.
Kenshiro called. He said you're already dead. I told him to leave a message. But yeah, well, that's kind of broken my train of thought somewhat.
They're coming from the same place as Princess Mononoke.
Yeah. I mean, I feel it's coming from that. I feel it's coming from the same tradition, but it's, to my mind, in Princess Mononoke, it's presented as something kind of grand, and there's a sense of it being about kind of wanting to show man at harmony with nature in a way with that film, that I feel like Fusé is going a different route. It's kind of more like when Hamaji kills the wolf, it's brutal and it's disgusting, and she breaks down crying after having done it. It's like she recognizes that she's doing this thing, and it's a bit, there's a sense of, why am I even doing this? Why do I have to do this anymore? Whereas in Princess Mononoke, you famously see Sun trying to suck the lead shot out of the wolf. She's trying to save its life. I mean, that's kind of, to me, that's more about trying to bring man and nature together. This is kind of about more the failure of man to understand nature in a way. I don't know, maybe I'm probably giving the film more credit than it deserves in a lot of ways, but this is just kind of what I took from it, is what I'm saying.
The thing is, you also have to think about the effect. Never mind what they were intending to do. And for me, you watch Princess Mononoke, and everything seems to make sense. You're right, it has a grandeur to it, into which the film fits. It slots in as sort of part of a bigger effect that it's going for. When I watch Fusé, I get a sense of, oh, this is a bit jarring and weird, and it's because I think it's gratuitous. It's not actually meant to convey anything except that, oh, we could put gore in this so that it isn't mistaken as a children's show or purely a children's show. I feel like, I don't know, at the start when she kills the wolf, and I think, oh, okay, so it's going to be a very sort of adult story, I suppose, or we're going to take a very non-patronizing approach to things. But then it'll undermine its own message with googly eyes and silly slapstick humor and really generic, I don't know, humorous scenes and pastel colors, and just something about it doesn't quite gel. It's almost like one person was in charge of the action scenes and someone else was in charge of the drama. Does that make sense?
No, I get where you're coming from. As I say, I think it's just that I think we're always just going to be on different sides in this one. It's just like, I've come to it and seen one thing, and you've come to it and seen another thing. I mean, I think it's fair enough. One thing that I was going to say is that I think coming to it as we are, as horrible, unwashed, dirty foreigners, that I think we're a little bit of a loss when dealing with something that is derived very much from Japanese folklore, and specifically the Hakkenden, which I get the impression is quite a long-established piece of popular culture to the Japanese. I mean, this is something that presumably someone can put up, like, can throw in a little reference to something like that, and a lot of people in Japan will get that, whereas it's something that is completely unfamiliar to us. I feel like the film is referencing certain things that would go over your head unless you really know that culture, unless you really know that tradition.
I think to a certain degree you're right. There is parts in the film probably fly over your head if you don't know something in that vein. I'm pretty sure near the end of the film there's reference to the sword Masamune as well, which again the name rings the bell because, you know, there's been characters in Japanese history and games and everything's been named Masamune.
Yeah.
And so, and people might know it as being like a legendary sword of some form, but they don't really know what the true nature of the sword is. And I think Isada
Yeah.
is using or has Masamune in his possession, and some people would wonder, what's the sword doing? Why is it suddenly all become phantasmical? And of course, just the Hakkenden itself, the folklore behind Yatsufusa, the 8 dogs and so on, I think would probably be a bit lost, especially if you were to go into this as blind as some probably have been.
I mean, you don't want to watch a movie for its references, do you? You want to watch a movie because it's going to have a good plot that makes sense in and of itself, and characters that fit within that plot, and make it vibrant and come alive for you, and that take you on an emotional journey. And the truth is, it doesn't matter whether you are from Japan and, you know, you're an expert on Hakkenden, or you're, I don't know, from somewhere in the UK. If you're watching a film, it should still make sense. And yeah, the film doesn't actually make sense. It falls apart, as Alan already described, particularly in the latter act. But also, it's basically like those things don't matter. Like, if whether or not they call it Masamune or they call it Bob, it just really doesn't matter. The point is, yeah, where did the sword come from? Why is it made of water? Why, you know, who is that guy wielding the sword? He sort of made allusions to, like, they allude to him in earlier parts of the film, and then suddenly he just pops up as this ultimate villain. But then, you know, he gets stabbed, but then he doesn't die, and then he's good at the end. And you just like, it doesn't matter if it's called Masamune or not. It's a thing. It's a prop. And the thing is, you know, man cannot live by references alone.
Well, I know that, but it is pitched at Japanese audiences, and all I'm trying to say is that I feel like these are things that are just taken as a given. You know, like, they expect the audience to know these things. I'm not saying it's necessarily right, and I mean, I know that a lot of films do convey things in a much more effective and more universal way, but I'm just saying I feel that's why they're not bothering to explain these things. So.
I mean, without knowing everything, or much at all, actually, I think you're still overestimating how much this is pitched at an audience, a Japanese audience that knows enough about Hakkenden. Something might be part of a background thing of a general culture, but actually not everyone in Japan is watching all anime at all times. Most Japanese people will just be normal. They will absorb as much Western media as they will some Japanese media. They won't be able to name all the anime directors. They'll probably be able to name one, if any at all. Most just are kind of like normal, right?
Yeah,
so
I mean,
they're not otaku who are absorbing absolutely every single fact. Even if in the background they grew up with knowing a bit about what Hakkenden is and so on, they might recognize one or two references. But the thing is, the plot by itself still has to make sense to an audience that is not someone who has read 106 books. I don't think that the average Japanese audience, unless they were literally pitching this at just the Hakkenden fans.
Well, I mean,
which is unlikely.
The impression I get is that it's possibly something that would be taught to you in school in Japan.
Yeah.
Is the feeling I get from it. It's like, I feel like it's a kind of quintessential part of their folklore in the way that, I don't know, something like maybe Robin Hood would be. You would have grown up with, you know, you maybe won't know all the specifics, but you'd have like a general understanding of, you would know who Robin Hood was. You know, you would probably have encountered some version of it at some stage, whether it be like in a school textbook, whether it be an anime version, whether it be a TV drama, a TV film, even a computer game. You know, I mean, I'm not saying like everyone is going to have been exposed to every part of it, but I feel like the general population would have enough of an understanding to at least be able to pick up on things to a certain extent in a way that we in the West wouldn't.
Okay,
I'm not saying that justifies it by any means, but I feel that's where it's coming from.
No, that might also be true, but it's just I don't see how that helps. Do you get what I mean? Like, when we assess the film as a film, we can't really talk about what we have or what we might have missed, the kinds of references and things, and how that, I don't know, because I don't think it would have made that much of a difference. You might say, oh, I recognize this name Masamune, or I recognize, what the Fusé are or whatever, but you know, then what? Are the characters actually interesting?
Well, no, but I mean, I don't know that is for me. I don't think that is necessarily the most interesting part of the film. For me, it's kind of breaking down its own reality in a way, because I mean, from the off, well, maybe not so much even from the very start, but when it comes in, and you've got the narrator going, and then later on you've got the emphasis on characters who are writing down a kind of fantasy history of their times, and I got the feeling that as it goes on, all these different levels of what people are writing are kind of merging with each other, and I think that's possibly what appealed to me the most about the film. That is what I took from it. I felt like they were trying to suggest that on some level what, like, for example, the little girl is writing, what her grandfather is writing, and what is actually happening, that the distinction between all of these things is getting blurred to the point where the different levels of the story are all becoming overlapped, and hence when you've got, like, at the end where you have Shiro confronting the shogun, he briefly turns into the feudal lord who is Princess Fusé's father, the one who makes the promise that my daughter's hand in marriage will go to whoever brings me the head of the enemy general. It's almost like the villain from that play that they put on in the middle of the film has become the end villain of this other level of story. And as I say, I'm not saying that this is used to massively good effect in the film, but I appreciated that it was there. To me, I thought that was what they were trying to do, and I liked that they were trying to do that. Is why I think I'm so keen to defend the film effectively.
I think that's an interesting take.
I mean, I'm not saying it's necessarily even definitely what they are trying to do, but I got the feeling that there was enough of a suggestion of that going on. Like in the earlier parts of the film, like at the very start, you have the narrator who comes on and says, I can't remember what it is now, something about Hamaji was distraught, and she immediately bursts out crying. For me, that was kind of mirrored later on in the film, where they go to see the kabuki play, and you have the narrator of the play who says something about, and then a child was born, and immediately you hear the child start crying. For me, it was like they're kind of playing with the way it's presented. You don't know on what level you're viewing it. Is this like a play that the characters are watching? Are the characters in the play? To what extent is this being affected by, like, the novel that, as I say, like the little girl was writing? To what extent is it affected by the history that her grandfather was writing? I like the fact that it was kind of breaking down the boundaries between all this.
It's also worth noting that the grandfather is actually the original author of the Hakkenden, and the daughter is the one that actually finishes it off. It's if anything to take from it, with the way the film ends up, you do get that feeling that is what's being written on the page being what's portrayed, or is it the other way around? Is it being made more realistic in the books, or is it being made more fantastical?
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty much it. That's what I kind of liked about it. It kind of plays with the notion of the author and what it is you're seeing. Kind of like you don't know exactly who it is that's telling the story, and I kind of like that sort of ambiguity of it.
I mean, looking back, your description or the way you've interpreted it is really interesting, and I wish I'd sort of noticed that a bit more, so that I could hook onto that. I ended up just sort of ignoring those bits because I just thought they were really sort of disconnected from the rest of it, and I couldn't make sense of their role in this whole plot. So I just sort of blanked out whenever they were happening, the bits with the little girl and the grandfather and stuff. I just had a feeling that wasn't going to go anywhere. But I mean, your interpretation would give it a sort of a more a meta, I suppose, feel to it. Which, I guess you could attribute it, but for me, it just didn't make enough of an impact.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough. Problem. Yeah, no, I mean, I can completely understand. I mean, I felt particularly towards the final, like the confrontation between Shiro and the Shogun. I felt at that point a lot of what was going on had just completely lost me. I was like, right, yeah, I was with you up to a point, but now it's just the floodgates are open. I have no idea what's going on anymore. And I mean, I thought it was quite interesting actually the way that they did bring in the Shogun as a character like that. There's kind of like this weird undercurrent that the Shogun seems to be kind of determined to prove almost like the worth of his line in a way by destroying the Fusé that are rampaging apparently. I think this was like shortly after Japan had been opened up by the West, as it were, and I don't know what it must have been like for them at this time that suddenly they were being threatened into being part of the outside world, and I guess that if you were the monarch of a country in that situation, you would be your sense of identity would just be completely in flux. You'd be so determined to prove that your efforts as a ruler were not for nothing, that you still had power and you could still command respect. And they've got him here as this kind of very vain, kind of frail, possibly insane man that is just clutching at straws and fighting fantasy monsters to try and cling on to his power in a way. I thought that interested me that the film touched on that, and again it was disappointing to me that they didn't make anything more of that. I felt that was just like another little thing that they threw into the suitcase that they could have done more with. I don't know.
It could also play to the part that he's obviously a descendant of Tokugawa himself, who was the one that united the land, so he's trying to fill shoes that he could never fill. But again, it's not really explained as to why he's so frail, why he's so,
well, I mean, there's like after he has the confrontation with Shiro, like he's briefly reduced to literally the status of an infant. Yeah, he curls up and starts sucking his thumb.
Yeah.
Did you call him Shiro? Because I thought it was Shino.
Shino.
Is it Shino? I've been calling him Shino.
Yeah, Shino. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to have to overdub my voice now.
Don't you think Shino was very good?
You are hearing my voice.
Which brings me actually to the next question I wanted to ask, which is, what did we make of the two main characters and this sort of relationship that was developing between them? I don't know. I instantly was thinking Romeo and Juliet as soon as they got together or whatever. Like as soon as they met, I mean. And somehow they, as characters, they don't seem to really go anywhere. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think the relationship between them only really works in fits and starts. I mean, at times I felt it kind of worked, and at times it's just... again, maybe if the film had been a series, there might have been more time to develop things like this to the point where it would be easier to care about it. But, yeah, as it was, sometimes I thought, okay, fair enough. And other times it's just like I didn't really care that much.
Were there any characters that we cared about that we thought were really interesting and fun, or somehow just stood out for us?
I don't honestly think many were that standoutish. Dosetsu was okay. Yeah. He seemed like he had one interest. He wanted to make money and make a life for himself, and that was it. But I think he had a lot of potential to be covered as a far more interesting character. It just wasn't there, and I think with that, there's no coverage of Asada at all. There's no coverage of the other kind of secondary characters enough to really give them much benefit. It was more, I would say the film's much more about just the general setting to me than it was the actual characters.
Yeah, I think that the film introduces a lot of characters as well. With it being a film, it might have been better if they just had fewer characters that they were trying to focus on in a way. I didn't think Hamaji was a bad protagonist, actually. I just thought that the film didn't really go anywhere with her in the end, and the scenes between her and the writer girl were quite difficult to get through at times. I felt like the dialogue had been written by like automatic dialogue writing bot 3000. Like the equivalent of the Microsoft paperclip comes up and says, I see you're trying to write a buddy movie. Would you like some help?
Yeah. Exactly. Well, I liked, there was one character that stuck with me a little bit more than the others, although I'll forget her too within a day or two. That was the Fusé that Hamaji kills.
Etazuru.
What's her name?
Etazuru, I think.
Itazuru, okay. She is introduced as some kind of extra special prostitute. They're in this prostitute district. She's an extra special prostitute who gets paraded through the streets because she's a maiden and she's beautiful. And what did they say? Like, her skin is really white.
Yeah, I think
and whatever.
she's described as a courtesan, specifically.
Yeah, whatever. And she has a big pompadour, like just this massive, huge fringe. She looks like Elvis, but
She does
like,
a bit,
and
yeah.
Yeah, and anyway, she's not actually beautiful the way they've designed her, but she's supposed to be. And then Hamaji then hunts her down after identifying her as a Fusé and kills her. But before she kills her, the werewolf lady gives her a letter and says, give it to Shinbi, who turns out to be her son. Now, for me, I thought this was sort of an interesting avenue and that the movie could have explored, but instead it really glosses over some weird inconsistencies. Like, she finds out that she's a Fusé and stuff, but she's very happy to hunt her down and kill her just for being a Fusé, even though she has befriended one beforehand. Which for me, I mean, she does it without real hesitation. And then afterwards she says, yeah, of course, I'll take the letter to this person that you want me to give the letter to. But why would you do that if you thought that, if you think this creature has humanity and deserves that kind of respect? Why would you even be willing to kill them in the first place, just like that, for money? And I don't know, it just seemed really weird to me that Hamaji could go from that to, in the next scene, being friends with Shino.
I do agree with you that they really glossed over the business with Shinbi. I think they could have made a lot more of that. I thought that, the fact when it comes out later when Shino says something like, oh yeah, Shinbi's been dead for ages, I thought like that was surprisingly downplayed by the film. I mean, I thought like that they could have made a lot more of that, and I'm surprised that they didn't, frankly. I get what you mean with the relationship between Hamaji and her feelings towards the Fusé, whether she should be killing them and hunting them and everything, could have been a lot better defined than it is. It didn't bother me all that much. I mean, I don't know if perhaps, like, for the first 2/3 of the way, I felt like this is building to something that's going to explain everything in the last act, and then that never arrives. But at the same time, the opening scene where she's still living in the mountains, and I got the impression that she's doing, when she's out hunting the wolves, she's doing the thing that she would have been doing like all the time, her and her grandfather, and it's like she's never really questioned it before. But now that he's dead, it's suddenly thrown into flux, and that obviously her brother has gone off and made a life for himself in the city, but she has remained with her grandfather, and now that he's gone, the reason for her being there isn't so clear-cut anymore. And I kind of got the feeling that there was a suggestion, at least, that on some level she doesn't know herself what it is she's doing or why she's doing this. It's just what she's always done, is to go out and hunt animals for the sake of food and for money. And when she comes to the city, it's like she's just doing the same thing again, in a way.
By the end, I was just left with a lot of questions. I was taking notes, and every single line I was writing was just like, it was a question, like, I don't know, why has that green-haired guy turned on his masters and starts helping the Fusé? Why do the people suddenly rise up against Commissioner Boji and his henchmen? They've been supporting the hunt for the Fusé all along. Suddenly her brother's a super awesome samurai like Rurouni Kenshin, literally like mows people down, but he's like, don't worry, I haven't killed them, they're still alive. And then, why is there a magical water sword? Who is that ultimate nemesis ruler of the city who can change heads? Like, why do his heads change? Stuff like that. It just becomes this discombobulated mess at the end, where you're just left with question after question, layer upon layer of mystery.
I think the head changing thing is possibly again taken from Kabuki theatre. I got the feeling that was like part of that was like a nod to the actors like changing costume really quickly.
Okay. I don't know why you don't just admit it's a crap film. You're really, really struggling to like defend.
No, I mean, I think I've always...
meta thing. I mean, no, it's something that you genuinely have interpreted. Yeah. So obviously that's fine. It's just like it's just easier, Alan. Join me on the dark side. It's easier to just admit it's a crap film. They don't know what they're doing. Someone wrote a script, got paid like 5 yen for it, and, buggered off again. And some idiot executive decided they could probably make a few bob just making this film. Nobody knew what they were doing. I really hope they listen to this podcast and they can just lift lines that you have said to justify retrospectively what they've created.
This is going to be like that, like this Chinese bootleg copy of the Old Boy remake film, like the Hollywood remake with Josh Brolin and that. And it's like they've pulled this quote for their box art for the film, and obviously it was done by someone who either really didn't care or whose grasp of English is perhaps not great, because it says on the cover of it, an unnecessary, pointless remake.
I remember seeing that. Yeah.
I love that they put literally the worst reviews on it. Oh, brilliant.
And I think that perhaps ties into my point quite nicely, because it's showing that how people in one culture have understood part of another culture but haven't quite understood all the specifics.
Is that going to be the closing line for the podcast? Because, I mean, as far as reinventions of a particularly famous franchise is concerned, this is not one of the best. I think if our listeners really, really, really love Hakkenden for some really random reason and have read all 106 books. Pardon?
The OAV of it from the 90s was, I think, reasonably popular, I guess.
Okay. Well,
the difference is the way it's approached, though. From what I can gather, as I said, I've not had a proper chance to read it, but the Hakkenden were not actually villainous or treated as enemies of the shogunate. They were actually treated more as the heroes. Overall, they're there to tackle the demons, not be the demons themselves. So there's a completely different take on the story behind them all.
So what we're saying is they were the Tokugawa era Power Rangers.
Yeah.
Possibly, possibly actually.
Perhaps the question we're asking ourselves is, why isn't this film better than it is?
Yes. Wow. Are we going to end the podcast on that question? I think that would be quite powerful.
It might, yeah.
I don't know. I don't think I've really helped with this one so much this time.
It's alright.
I don't know, it's just the way the discussion's been. I think it's been rather as disjointed as the film. I think all you need now is kind of like a cliff of people saying that question, just turning to look at the audience.
Got to some kind of deeper truth in the end. I think that would be a good way to describe this episode in general. It's as disjointed as the film we're describing.
Look at the audience.
Yes, and it ends on a question, just like the film.
So, in light of our conversation up to this point, when it came time to edit this episode, I realised a bit after the fact that our own Genkina Hito is actually quite a fan of this film, and unfortunately, while we couldn't really go back and re-record everything with him on as a guest, which would probably have been the ideal scenario, I was able to ask him for his comments, which we will now play for you, and then we will come back and give our own final comments in light of what he's said, if that makes any sort of sense.
Hi, Genkina Hito, news writer and occasional reviewer here, and now podcaster. I was invited to talk on this episode because I wrote a series of news reports about Fusé, a gun girl story, or as it is also known, Fusé, Memoirs of the Hunter Girl, for Anime UK News just before its release in 2012, and then I reviewed it back in 2013, an experience I enjoyed tremendously. My memories of the film were strong, so when I listened to an early recording of the podcast, I was somewhat taken aback by the level of criticism it faced. Did they watch the same film I did? Surely it isn't as bad as the discussion makes it out to be. Of course, taste is a personal thing, but I had to watch it for myself again, and not just for the podcast, but because I really liked the film. Here's my take. Fusé, Memoirs of the Hunter Girl, is a beautiful romp through Japan's tumultuous past. It all starts with the source novel, Fusé Gansaku Satomi Hakkenden, written by Kazuki Sakuraba and published in 2010. Her name may be familiar to anime fans thanks to the 2011 TV anime series Gosek. Fusé is something totally different. The title translates as The Fake Fusé, Satomi Hakkenden, and takes the famous historical folk story Nanso Satomi Hakkenden, a 106-volume novel written by Kyokute Bakken in the mid-1800s, and presents a variation on that original tale. or what is called a counterfeit story. I have not read Sakuraba's original novel, so I can only really comment on the film. My first impressions, and the ones I formed upon more recent subsequent viewings, are, I am pleased to say, very positive. I love the film just as much as I did the first time I watched it. Fusé, Memoirs of the Hunter Girl, can be viewed simply as a light fantasy story with some substance, an update of a classic tale, which has been animated for modern audiences multiple times. Comparisons will inevitably be made with Studio Ghibli, thanks to the lead female character, the fantasy and historical elements, and ease of which it manages to mix different tones, the beautiful and the horrific. Indeed, a quick check of the filmography of the director Masayuki Miyagi reveals that he was assistant director on Spirited Away, and there are moments which recall that title, but Fusé stands on its own and is a unique and fun historical action tale with literary trappings that a general audience should be able to detect and understand, even if the references aren't that well known. One of the strengths of Fusé is that it allows us a glimpse of real Japan and Japanese history, with the Bakumatsu period and historical figures making an appearance. We get to see Edo and the shaky reign of Tokugawa Ieyasu providing a backdrop to the story. If that sounds dry and maybe dull, it isn't, because we are given an entertaining fantasy story full of comedy and action and fantastic animation. The film has a relatable lead in Hamaji, a confident girl and expert hunter, and through her emotional and physical journey offers a way for us to understand this history, as she travels from her remote mountain home in Mutsu province to Edo to live with her brother Dosetsu, who sought to make his fortune as a samurai in the city, but is finding life difficult. As they explore their surroundings and meet various people, we get to see a lot of historical and societal details, such as gender roles, the entertainment people had at the time, such as wood prints and kabuki theatre, and as they get involved in the lives of various characters and key points in Japanese history, we meet the famous Kyokute Bakin, who makes an appearance, and with his granddaughter, as they both set out to create a new version of the original story that has inspired the film. This is all brought to life by the detailed animation which comes from TMS Entertainment, a studio with a long history in the animation industry, with work on many major titles like the sci-fi classic Akira and their most recent near-the-knuckle supernatural comedy Gogure Kokure-san. Their work here is gorgeous and singular, as viewers will discover when they watch the film and are transported back in time. The age is brought to life in well-drawn, highly detailed and imaginatively depicted locations that range from the wilderness of Japan to the hustle and bustle of Edo, which look to have been meticulously researched and brought to life. Far from just being a beautiful backdrop, they bring to life the fascinating aspects of the age, such as the infamous Yoshiwara district where prostitutes reside in glitzy gilded cages and the grimy reality that's hidden behind a pretty face. The colours for all these scenes are vivid, with purple lilacs and violets, cherry reds and walnut browns and rose pinks lighting up the screen and creating a beautiful palette that becomes even more beautiful during standout sequences such as fireworks and festivals. My absolute favourite moment comes when Hamaji and her brother are reunited in the warm evening glow of a setting sun, and they party late into the night, surrounded by a small but tight community of memorable characters, all of whom have a distinctive and memorable look. Hamaji looking like a complete tomboy, Dosetsu with his square jaw, not like a samurai, but being a little goofy, and Dosetsu's romantic interest, Funamushi, a down-to-earth beauty. Only Shino conforms to type by being a beautiful bishi, but then he is a supernatural creature, a Fusé, and that fits in with his role as an actor in a kabuki theatre who plays female roles. With vivid colours and detailed art, this feels like a living, breathing city. All this talk of historical detail might make you think you need a degree in Japanese history, but you really don't. It's easy enough to understand what's going on many levels, thanks to a supernatural action tale and the cast of characters and Hamaji's journey. Admittedly, the story is light on various aspects, with Hamaji and Shino given a brief romance that is only touched upon, and the Fusé and their motivations not really explored. Indeed, there is a sense that the film does not explain enough as it whips along quickly through its final third, perhaps too quickly for some audience members. And more time could be spent expanding characters, but for me, I enjoyed it. I was totally enthralled and understood a lot of what was going on. I was able to suspend my disbelief at various points. I think there's enough for an audience to enjoy. For a Japanese audience in particular, there's a lot of subtext. As mentioned previously, Kazuki Sakuraba's novel title translates as The Fake Fusé, Satomi Hakkenden, and that fits in with a film concerned about fakes. The themes and questions surrounding being fake and true are most prominent in situations surrounding Hamaji and Dosetsu and the Shogun, who constantly ponder whether they are living a genuine life and struggle to find the answer. They come to question their roles in society and whether they are being true to themselves and others. Their journeys see them don different disguises and take on different personas as they battle the Fusé and deal with their own emotional changes and prove to themselves whether they are worthy of being a hunter or leader. But their brush with the Fusé, a piece of real Japanese history, teaches them some virtues such as honesty and being genuine to themselves. I had to talk to my Japanese teacher Takako to find out a little more about the original story which inspired Kazuki Sakuraba's novel. The original tale of Nanso Satomi Hakkenden came in the form of a 106-volume novel written by Kyokutei Bakken in the mid-1800s. It is classed as Taishu Bungaku, or literature for everyone, populist fiction for the masses that everyone can enjoy, and it is briefly touched upon in Japanese schools. A brief mention for it when summing up authors from Japanese history and their works. Through its characters of the 8 brothers, each representing a Buddhist virtue, such as loyalty and honesty, it presents a traditional tale of good versus evil, where virtue is ultimately rewarded and moral lessons are taught. With such content, it is proven to be a source of animation with numerous adaptations made. I find it fitting that its most modern update is an anime that is as beautiful and accessible and, dare I say, as populist as it turned out to be. I also wonder if the release of a film a year after the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami of 2011 and amidst political turmoil and an economic slump is a reminder to Japanese audiences that Japan has been through times of strife in the past, and that audiences might do well to remember the original tale of the 8 samurai and the virtues they represent. If audiences choose not to look back to the original novels, they can always watch this film and be reminded of such virtuous actions.
Genkina Hito's perspective is interesting in the sense, well, for me anyway, in the sense that we're seeing the same facts, I suppose. We're seeing the same events happening in the show, but interpreting them very differently. Just a key example, he thinks the character designs are interesting and unique. I just don't. I think that they're banal, they're cookie cutter, just because they have like an interesting face shape, or I suppose not the usual Ghibli face shape, doesn't necessarily make it innovative or different or interesting in this vast context of anime that's being made all over the place. I'm trying to think, what else did I actually think about? Oh yeah, and he mentions also the historical aspects, how the show might give us insights into historical aspects of Japan. And I'm not really convinced of that. Just because a show drops in little clues or happens to be set in a particular time period doesn't mean it is in any way giving us insight into history, especially when it is largely and significantly fantasy in nature. So, the fact that there's these little folklores, these little creatures being thrown in there, that's not a virtue of a show. The show is not using its plot to give us actual history. It is borrowing from history and folklore and tradition to weave something that's basically 99% made up. And I'm thinking that 99% of made up stuff is not coherently portrayed. So that's my problem with it. I'm done.
Oh, cool.
As for Genkina's comments on the film, which I'm thankfully came and did actually for us, it was quite nice to have just even an extra comment on the matter. I feel, in some ways, listening back on it, I kind of wonder if I was too negative on the series, because I actually quite enjoyed the film. It wasn't amazing from what I remember, but it was certainly enjoyable, and I think in some ways I probably didn't come across as that. I think what was bothered me most listening to that, he says it was unique. I don't feel it was unique. The film certainly has a really nice stylistic approach to it. What it captured historically was really nice, especially as you pointed out the prostitution cages, essentially.
That is definitely going in the tags for this episode. Prostitution cages.
Prostitution cages, yeah. But I think what really maybe just dropped the series down a notch for me wasn't so much that the action or the story wasn't there. I mean, it was, even though it was slightly rushed at the end, it was more that the kind of relationships between characters was rather generic. It wasn't unique. It wasn't extremely fresh. There was a lot of predictability with it. The relationship between Hamaji and Shino felt rather obvious. The way that Shino's character was approached and the way things ended felt rather predictable in a way for me. There's just bits and pieces that I think was kind of like that. And whilst that's not necessarily always a bad thing in certain films, granted a lot of films kind of run on old cliched ideas and work just as well, I think it doesn't help make it as great an experience as it could be. It's still very good, it's still decent, but I think it could have been a notch higher. I'm not really sure I can go against many other of his comments. I mean, world building wise it was nice, the different take on the books was also nice to see. Again, I just think that it's not really that unique in my opinion. If it wasn't so rushed at the end as well, if there didn't feel like they were trying to dish out a lot more at the last kind of third of the film, maybe just played out slightly longer, it would have been better. But again, I think that's mostly my gripes with the film. I think that's about all I've got to say on them, actually.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, I think as well my own feelings are pretty much have stayed the same. I did think it was interesting that Genkina Hito mentioned that it was the film was made by TMS, which was something that I hadn't really sort of think about previously, but I think we were comparing the look of the character designs with kind of look of early Lupin designs, and obviously TMS are responsible for the Lupin franchise, and I don't know whether maybe there's been a bit of overlap and that would contribute to the look of the film. But I mean, I think that Miyagi as a director is probably one to watch, but I think he has some ways to go to escape the shadow of his peers at Ghibli. I think that this Fusé is still, to me, a middling film with some interesting ideas. I think that Hamaji is a pleasing protagonist, but the characters around her I didn't think were very often not as engaging, and they didn't seem to my mind, they didn't elicit the sympathy that the story suggests we ought to be feeling for them, particularly the Fusé themselves. The film kind of clearly wants us to ask how much of a threat the Fusé are, but it's difficult. I mean, when Shino first appears on the screen, he's reaping bloody vengeance against the Shogun's hunters, which I think is also kind of an indication of the film's wider problems with tone. I mean, generally it plays closer to the lighter territory one might expect from a Ghibli adventure, but it often seems to be interrupted by moments of jarringly graphic bloodshed. I certainly don't think it's a dead loss. I mean, I can't stress that enough. It's not that I dislike the film. I think it's, as Genkina Hito was saying, it's a very colourful film. But I think I do quite like the look of it. I still feel that it doesn't really make good on its early promise. And I mean, given the choice, I would always rather watch an ambitious failure than a mediocre success. But yeah, I just feel that Fusé is perhaps slightly less than the sum of its parts, is just my kind of overall feeling about it. I do find it surprising that the film has not yet had a UK release. I mean, from some of the reactions I've seen online, I know there have been some kind of quite mixed feelings about the film, but I think it would find an audience if it was released, and if it does come out, then yeah, I mean, I would certainly consider picking it up if it's not too expensive. If you've seen the film, be sure to leave us a comment and let us know what you think. Again, if you've been affected by any of the issues raised in this podcast, you can contact us directly at podcast@animeuknews.net is our email. We also have Facebook. If you search for Nakama Britannica, we will try and get back to you. And yeah, hopefully we will have a new episode out for you before, I don't know, the kind of any signs of the apocalypse occur and we're all just like podcasting in bomb shelters somewhere and fighting over the last few remaining drops of water. God, that was a really downbeat way to end.
Why not, eh? Why
Happy
does everything
thoughts,
have
happy
to be
thoughts.
upbeat?
Yes.
We're all going to die anyway. Might as well face the reality.
Oh dear. Yes, better to die on your feet than live on your knees.
Aye. Aye.